Have you ever wondered what it's like to see ghosts? Well, I didn't believe in them until that night at Navy Pier. So, it all started on a chilly fall evening. My name's Jason Parker, and I'm crazy about photography. I've always been drawn to capturing the eerie beauty of nighttime scenes. My best friend, Mark, and I decided to hit up Navy Pier in Chicago. We thought it would be a perfect night to get some wonderful shots. We even convinced Laura, another photographer and a bit of a rival, to join us. She's always trying to one-up me, but I like the competition. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Mark asked as we stood at the base of the Ferris wheel. It was lit up in a kaleidoscope of colors, the lights reflecting off the dark waters of Lake Michigan. "Relax, Mark. What's the worst that could happen? It's just a Ferris wheel," I replied with a smirk, adjusting my camera. Mark's always been the cautious one. He's like my anchor, keeping me grounded when my head gets too far into the clouds. Laura, on the other hand, was already snapping pictures, eager to capture the perfect shot. As we approached the ride, the operator, an older man with a weathered face, gave us a strange look. "You kids sure you want to ride this late?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "We've had incidents at night." I brushed him off. "We'll be fine. Just a few quick photos and we're out of here." The old man just shook his head and let us board. We got into the gondola, and as it started to rise, the view was breathtaking. The city lights sparkled like stars below us. I was busy snapping photos when I noticed something odd. In the gondola across from us, I saw a faint, ghostly figure of a young girl. She looked so sad, staring right at me. "Did you see that?" I whispered, pointing my camera at the other gondola. Mark looked over, his face pale. "See what?" "That girl. There's a girl over there." Laura rolled her eyes. "Come on, Jason, stop trying to freak us out." But I wasn't joking. As the Ferris wheel turned, more ghostly figures appeared in the other gondolas. Each one looked trapped and distressed. My heart started pounding. What was going on? The ride continued, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The ghostly girl appeared again, this time mouthing words I couldn't hear. I snapped a photo, but the image on my screen was just a blur. "Something's not right," I muttered, my hands trembling. "Maybe we should get off at the next round," Mark suggested, his voice shaking too. But the Ferris wheel kept turning, each rotation pulling us deeper into the night. And I couldn't help but feel we were being drawn into something far more sinister than just a spooky ride. As we ascended higher, the Ferris wheel's rhythmic creaking seemed louder, more ominous. The temperature dropped noticeably, a biting cold that made my breath fog up in front of me. I wrapped my jacket tighter, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. "Does it feel colder to you guys?" I asked, glancing at Mark and Laura. Mark nodded, rubbing his arms for warmth while Laura just huffed, her competitive nature making her dismissive of my concerns. "Maybe it's just the wind up here," she said. But her voice had an edge, like she didn't quite believe her own words. As we reached the top, the Ferris wheel paused, leaving us hanging in the air. The lights flickered for a moment, casting eerie shadows inside our gondola. I looked down at the pier below, now seeming distant and unreal. The usual lively bustle of Navy Pier felt muted, as if we were in a different world altogether. "Did you guys hear that?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" I replied, straining to catch any sound over the wind. "I thought I heard crying," he said, looking around nervously. Laura rolled her eyes again but didn't say anything this time. She was too busy adjusting her camera, trying to capture the perfect shot of the cityscape, but her hands were shaking. I focused my camera on the gondolas again, trying to catch another glimpse of the ghostly figures. And there she was, the young girl, her face pale and eyes wide with sorrow. She seemed closer this time, almost as if she were reaching out to us. I tried to steady my hand and take a photo, but the camera refused to focus. A shiver ran down my spine, not just from the cold, There was something deeply unsettling about her gaze. It felt like she was trying to tell us something urgent. "Do you think she's real?" Mark asked, his voice breaking the silence. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I've never seen anything like this before." Suddenly, the gondola swayed violently, as if something had hit it. We grabbed onto the sides, our hearts racing. The lights flickered again, plunging us into darkness for a few terrifying seconds before coming back on. "Did you feel that?" Laura asked, her earlier bravado gone. "What the hell is happening?" "I don't know, but we need to get off this thing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The Ferris wheel started moving again, slower this time, as if it was struggling. My gut told me something was very wrong. Each turn of the wheel felt heavier, more labored, like it was carrying more than just us. As we descended, I noticed the other gondolas swinging slightly, as if there were unseen passengers. The shadows inside them seemed to move, shifting shapes that defied logic. My camera, usually reliable, refused to capture anything but blurry, indistinct forms. Mark's eyes widened. "I don't think we're alone up here." I didn't want to admit it, but he was right. Something, or someone, was up here with us. And it wasn't just the wind. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that those ghostly figures were more than just figments of my imagination. As we neared the bottom, the Ferris wheel jerked to a stop again, and the operator's voice crackled over the intercom. "End of the ride, folks. Please disembark quickly." But the voice had a strange echo to it, a hollow, eerie tone that sent chills down my spine. We hurried out, our feet hitting the solid ground with a sense of relief. But the night was far from over. As we walked away from the Ferris wheel, I glanced back and saw the young girl again, standing at the edge of the platform, watching us. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but her eyes spoke volumes. Something had changed. We had caught the attention of something beyond this world, and I had a feeling it wasn't going to let us go that easily. As we walked away from the Ferris wheel, I could feel the tension among us growing thicker. Mark was unusually quiet, his eyes darting around as if expecting something to jump out at us. Laura, on the other hand, was visibly irritated, her competitive nature taking a back seat to genuine fear. "What was that about?" Laura snapped, breaking the silence. "Are you trying to freak us out, Jason? Because if you are, it's not funny." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I'm not making this up, Laura. You saw them too, didn't you? Those figures?" She glared at me, but I saw the doubt in her eyes. "I don't know what I saw. Maybe it was just shadows or reflections." Mark finally spoke up, his voice shaky. "Shadows don't cry, Laura. I heard it. And the way that girl looked at us." I nodded, glad someone else was taking this seriously. "Exactly. Something's not right here. We need to figure out what's going on." Laura scoffed. "Figure out what? That we're all losing our minds? Maybe it's just a trick of the light, or our imaginations running wild." My frustration bubbled over. "Why do you always have to be so dismissive? Can't you just admit that something strange is happening?" Laura crossed her arms, her defensiveness making her look smaller. "Because I don't want to believe it, okay? I don't want to think that we just saw ghosts or whatever. It's terrifying." Mark put a hand on her shoulder. "Look, we're all scared, but ignoring it isn't going to help. Maybe there's a way to understand what's going on." I could see Laura soften a bit, her bravado cracking under the weight of the night's events. She nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but where do we even start?" We found a bench and sat down, trying to piece together what had happened. The night air was heavy, and the sounds of the amusement park felt distant, almost muted. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of the ghostly figures and the eerie feeling that had settled over us. "I think we should start with the Ferris wheel," I said, breaking the silence. "That girl, Emily, she seemed like she was trying to tell us something." Mark nodded. "Yeah, but how? It's not like we can just ask her." I stared at my camera, hoping it held some clue. Maybe the photos will help. If I can capture something clear enough, we might get some answers. Laura sighed, her earlier irritation replaced by exhaustion. All right, Jason, but if we're doing this, we need to be smart. No more running headfirst into danger. I appreciated her concern, even if it was wrapped in sarcasm. Agreed. We stick together. No one goes off on their own. We headed back to my apartment to examine the photos. The ride back was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the ghostly figures were still with us. Once we got to my place, I loaded the photos onto my computer. The images were blurry and indistinct, but one photo stood out. It was the girl Emily, clearer than before. She was pointing to something, her expression pleading. There, I said, pointing at the screen. She's trying to show us something. Mark leaned in, squinting at the image. It looks like the Ferris wheel. Laura nodded slowly. Maybe there's something we missed. Something on the Ferris wheel itself. I felt a chill run down my spine. The Ferris wheel had become more than just a ride. It was a gateway to something darker, something that was now pulling us in. And I couldn't help but feel that we were only scratching the surface of a much deeper mystery. As we prepared to go back, I couldn't shake the doubts creeping into my mind. What if we were in over our heads? What if we were poking at something best left alone? But one look at Mark and Laura told me we were in this together, for better or worse. All right, I said, steeling myself. Let's get to the bottom of this. Mark nodded, his resolve firm. We'll figure it out, Jason. Whatever it takes. Laura gave a small, determined smile. Yeah, let's do this. And with that, we headed back into the night, unaware of the horrors that awaited us. Back at Navy Pier, the Ferris wheel loomed over us like a giant, silent sentinel. The colorful lights that once seemed inviting now cast eerie, shifting shadows. My heart pounded as we approached, each step echoing in the deserted night. The air was thick with tension, every creak and rustle amplifying our fear. We stopped a few feet from the Ferris wheel, taking a moment to gather ourselves. Are we really doing this? Mark asked, his voice a mix of fear and determination. We have to, I replied, my eyes fixed on the gondolas. Emily needs our help. Laura took a deep breath. Okay, but we stick together. No splitting up. We climbed into a gondola, the old operator nowhere to be seen. As the ride started, the familiar creaking sound felt heavier, almost mournful. The Ferris wheel turned slowly, each rotation pulling us further into the mystery. The city lights below seemed to fade, the world shrinking until it was just us and the wheel. Halfway up, the gondola jerked to a stop, throwing us off balance. I grabbed my camera, ready for anything. The ghostly figures appeared again, more vivid and desperate. Emily was among them, her eyes filled with sorrow. She pointed again, this time towards the center of the wheel. Do you see that? I whispered, my voice barely audible. She's pointing at something in the middle. Mark leaned closer, squinting. It's too dark. We need to get closer. With a deep breath, we decided to climb out of the gondola. The structure groaned under our weight, but we managed to reach the center. There, hidden among the metal beams, was a small, rusted door. Do we open it? Laura asked, her voice trembling. We have to, I said, reaching for the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway. We squeezed through, our flashlights barely cutting through the darkness. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of rust and decay. As we moved deeper, the passage opened into a small chamber. In the dim light, I could see old, faded photos pinned to the walls. Photos of children who had gone missing over the years. My stomach churned as I recognized Emily among them. What is this place? Mark muttered, his voice echoing in the confined space. Before I could answer, a cold, spectral hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun around, face to face with Emily's ghost. Her eyes were filled with desperation. her mouth forming words I could barely hear. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing in my mind. "How? How can we help you?" I asked, my voice cracking. Her gaze shifted to the center of the chamber where a small, ancient-looking box sat. I moved towards it, the air growing colder with each step. As I opened the box, a rush of cold air burst out, revealing a single old-fashioned key. "She wants us to free her," Laura said, her voice shaking. I grabbed the key, feeling a surge of icy energy. "Where does this go?" Emily pointed towards the exit, her figure fading. We rushed back to the gondola, the key heavy in my hand. As we climbed back inside, the Ferris wheel started moving again, faster this time. The figures in the gondolas grew clearer, their eyes pleading for release. At the top, the wheel stopped, the gondola swaying precariously. In the center of the wheel, another small door appeared, barely visible. I reached out, inserting the key into the lock. The door swung open, and a blinding light enveloped us. I heard Emily's voice clearer than ever. "Thank you." Suddenly, the gondola jolted, and I lost my grip. I felt myself falling, the world spinning around me. I braced for impact, but instead, I landed softly, back on the ground. Mark and Laura were beside me, dazed but unharmed. The Ferris wheel stood still, its lights dimmed. The ghostly figures were gone, replaced by an eerie silence. I looked at my camera, the last photo showing Emily, finally free, her face at peace. We stumbled away from the Ferris wheel, our minds racing. We had faced the unknown and survived, but the experience left us changed. The city lights seemed brighter now, the night air warmer. We walked in silence, each lost in our thoughts, knowing we had witnessed something extraordinary. As we reached the edge of the pier, Mark broke the silence. "Do you think it's over?" I looked back at the Ferris wheel, now just a silent, lifeless structure. "I hope so," I said, though I knew the memory of that night would haunt us forever. Laura sighed, her competitive edge softened by the night's events. "Whatever happens, we did the right thing." And with that, we walked away, the sounds of the amusement park fading behind us, leaving the horror of the Ferris wheel in the past, but never truly forgotten. A few days after our harrowing experience at the Ferris wheel, life seemed to return to normal, but the eerie memories clung to us like shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. Emily's ghost might be free, but there was a lingering sense of unfinished business. One evening, while reviewing the photos on my computer, I noticed something odd. In one of the pictures, there was a reflection in the Ferris wheel's glass. At first glance, it seemed like another ghostly figure, but on closer inspection, it was different. The figure wore modern clothing, unlike Emily and the other apparitions. "Hey, Mark, Laura, you need to see this," I called, my heart racing. Mark arrived first, peering over my shoulder. "What now, Jason?" "Look at this reflection," I said, pointing at the screen. Laura joined us, squinting at the image. "That's not one of the ghosts we saw. Who is that?" Mark shook his head. "Maybe it's just a trick of the light? Or perhaps it's something we missed," I replied, feeling a mix of curiosity and dread. "We need to find out who this is." We decided to return to Navy Pier the next night, hoping to uncover more clues. The Ferris wheel was operating as usual, its cheerful lights belying the darkness we knew it harbored. As we approached, a sense of foreboding washed over me. We started asking around, showing the photo to workers and visitors. Most people dismissed it as nothing unusual, but one older man, a vendor who had been working at the pier for years, paused when he saw the image. "I recognize the jacket," he said, his voice tinged with concern. "Belonged to a kid who disappeared a couple of months ago. Name was Tommy." A chill ran down my spine. "Disappeared? Do you think he—" The man nodded slowly. "He was last seen near the Ferris wheel. Some say the place is cursed. Strange things happen there." Mark and Laura exchanged worried glances. "We need to check this out," Laura said, determination in her eyes. We returned to the Ferris wheel, the same operator from before giving us a wary look. "Back again? Didn't you kids learn your lesson?" "There's more to this," I insisted, showing him the photo. "Do you know anything about this boy?" The operator's face paled. "Tommy, he was curious just like you, wanted to see the ghosts, but he never came back." A knot formed in my stomach. "We have to go up again," I said, more to myself than anyone else. Reluctantly, the operator led us on. As the Ferris wheel ascended, the familiar creaks and groans filled the air. This time, there were no ghostly figures, only an oppressive silence. We reached the top and the ride paused again, leaving us suspended in the night. "I don't see anything," Mark said, his voice tense. "Wait," Laura whispered, pointing to a spot below us. "There, near the base. Do you see that?" In the dim light, I could make out a small hidden door similar to the one we found before. We descended quickly, rushing to the spot. The door was rusted and old, barely visible behind some bushes. Mark forced it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down. We hesitated, the darkness seeming to breathe around us. "We have to go down," I said, my voice steady despite my fear. We descended the steps, the air growing colder with each step. The passage opened into a small room, much like the one before, but this time it was filled with strange symbols and writings on the walls, and a small flickering light in the corner. In the center of the room was a makeshift altar with a collection of old dusty toys. A chill ran down my spine as I realized they belonged to the missing children, including Tommy. "What is this place?" Laura whispered, her voice trembling. Suddenly, the light flickered and a shadowy figure appeared, moving towards us. It wasn't Emily. This spirit was different, angrier, more chaotic. "You shouldn't be here," a voice echoed, cold and menacing. Mark stepped back, his face pale. "We need to get out of here." But before we could move, the figure lunged at us, its presence overwhelming. I stumbled back, feeling a surge of panic. Was this another trapped spirit, or something more sinister? As we fled back up the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only uncovered part of the mystery. Emily's story might be over, but the Ferris wheel held more secrets. Dark, terrifying secrets that refused to let us go. Once outside, we caught our breath, the night air feeling strangely warm. We had survived another encounter, but the unanswered questions loomed larger than ever. Who was the shadowy figure? What happened to Tommy and the other children? "Jason," Laura said, her voice breaking the silence. "This isn't over. We need to find the truth." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "We will. Whatever it takes, we'll uncover what's really happening here." As we walked away from the Ferris wheel, the feeling of being watched returned. I knew the horror was far from over. In the days that followed, the events at Navy Pier weighed heavily on us. The images of Emily and Tommy haunted my thoughts, and the shadowy figure's warning echoed in my mind. I found it hard to sleep, my dreams filled with ghostly apparitions and chilling whispers. Mark and Laura were affected too, though each dealt with it in their own way. Mark, usually the calm and collected one, started avoiding places we used to go together. He became distant, his eyes shadowed with fear and doubt. One night, he confided in me, his voice shaking. "Jason, I can't stop thinking about that place. What if there's more to it? What if we're just scratching the surface?" Laura, on the other hand, threw herself into her work, using photography as a way to escape the horrors we'd witnessed. But even she couldn't hide the anxiety that crept into her voice whenever we talked about the Ferris wheel. "We need to find answers," she insisted. "We owe it to those kids, and to ourselves." Driven by our shared need for closure, we returned to Navy Pier one last time. The Ferris wheel stood tall against the night sky, an imposing silhouette that seemed to mock our bravery. As we approached, the old operator greeted us with a solemn nod, as if expecting our return. "You're back," he said quietly. "I hoped you wouldn't be." "We need to know the truth," I replied, my voice firm. He sighed deeply. "Be careful. The wheel holds many secrets, and not all of them want to be found." This time, we approached with more caution, each step laden with dread. The hidden door at the base of the Ferris wheel was ajar, as if inviting us back into the darkness. We descended the stairs, our flashlights flickering in the damp, cold air. The room below was just as we left it, the altar with its dusty toys standing as a grim reminder of the missing children. But something was different. There was a new object on the altar, a small, ornate mirror. Its surface was covered in a fine layer of dust, but when I wiped it clean, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Reflected in the mirror was not my own face, but that of the shadowy figure we had seen before. It stared back at me, its eyes filled with malice and despair. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure's lips moved, but no sound came out. Instead, a chilling realization washed over me. This spirit was not a victim like Emily or Tommy. It was something else. Something much darker. Suddenly the mirror cracked, a spiderweb of fractures spreading across its surface. The room grew colder, and the symbols on the walls seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. The ground beneath us trembled, and the air was filled with an oppressive, suffocating presence. "We need to get out of here," Mark shouted, his voice barely audible over the rising din. We turned to flee, but the narrow passageway seemed to stretch and twist, distorting our path. Panic set in as we stumbled through the darkness, the walls closing in around us. My mind raced, fear clawing at my sanity. Just when it seemed we were trapped, we burst out into the night air, collapsing on the ground outside. The Ferris wheel stood silent and unmoving, as if mocking our escape. Gasping for breath, we looked at each other, the horror of what we had seen etched into our faces. The mirror, the shadowy figure. It was all too much to process. "We can't come back here," Laura said, her voice shaking. "We have to let it go." Mark nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. What if it's not over? What if it follows us? As we walked away from the Ferris wheel for the last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't truly escaped. The shadowy figure's reflection haunted my thoughts, its eyes filled with a promise of lingering darkness. Weeks passed, and we tried to move on, but the psychological scars remained. Mark avoided discussing it altogether, throwing himself into his work. Laura and I stayed in touch, but there was always an unspoken tension between us, a shared trauma that refused to fade. One night, as I sat alone, reviewing the photos from that fateful night, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the background of one image, barely visible, was the shadowy figure. It was watching us, its eyes filled with a cold, malevolent intelligence. A chill ran down my spine. What if the horror we uncovered wasn't confined to the Ferris wheel? What if it had followed us, waiting for the right moment to strike again? The thought kept me awake, my mind racing with possibilities. Had we truly freed Emily, or had we merely unleashed something far worse? The lingering question gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the veil of reality. And as I sat there, staring into the flickering screen, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. Turning slowly, I saw nothing but shadows, but I knew deep down that the nightmare was far from over. The Ferris wheel may have been the beginning, but the true horror had only just begun. And somewhere in the darkness, the shadowy figure waited, a silent, watchful presence that would haunt me forever.